Welcome to the Continuing Education module, Shaping Your Wellness Program's Goals, Setting an Intentional Direction for the Future. Our agenda for this module includes looking at some current patterns for existing wellness program goals, a criteria for a good goal, a typical set of program goals, some of the implications of specific goals, a clinic on how to write goals, a prioritization process that can be used to prioritize your goals, and a summary of key points. Why are goals important? First of all, they reflect your purpose. So that's how we communicate both with employees and management what the purpose of our program is. They focus organizational action, so they give me a way to build various activities around specific goals. They help ensure progress, so we are in fact meeting those goals. So as they're articulated and as I can see other activities aligning with them, they help ensure progress. They also help unify involvement. So as people in various activities get into wellness of a particular type, then it unifies their involvement by giving some purpose and some intention to what they're involved in. They are also necessary for accountability. So without having a set of goals, we're not likely to be able to be held accountable because there's basically no roadmap, there's no rails to run on. So the goals provide that and provide also our needs for accountability. Typical program goals include things like improving employee health, reducing the growth of health costs, whether those are limited to just your medical plan cost or they include sick leave absenteeism and or workers' compensation and or disability insurance costs, short-term and long-term, and or presenteeism. So those are the economic variables that we associate with worker health that are part of our efforts usually to intentionally reduce the growth of those costs. We also want to reduce health risk. So our prevalence and severity of health risk are often what we're focused on, and because we know that health risk generally tend to drive up health costs. So those different types of health costs are affected by the health risk that individuals have in a given workforce. We also generally want to save money for the employer. So if our wellness program can keep people healthy, and we're doing it so that that does become one of the results, then we have the potential to save money for the employer. We also tend to have goals like enhancing employee productivity. So that may be a general goal that we have associated with our wellness program. Sometimes we want to have a goal that is oriented towards satisfying the employee's needs in a way that allow them to feel that the employer is responsive to those needs. 7, we oftentimes want to have a goal to improve recruitment and retention of employees. So we want to be able to recruit new employees, but also retain the employees that we currently have. And finally, we oftentimes have a goal to change the organizational culture. And we do that in a variety of ways, but that oftentimes is a specific example of a goal that a wellness program can have. The current pattern of goals that, as I look across the U.S. marketplace, the U.S. employer marketplace around wellness, is, first of all, many goals I think are overly general. So they don't provide much direction for us if they in fact are too general. Oftentimes there's limited consensus on those goals. So the goals may be listed in a manual or in a book or in some program documents, but not necessarily be used by the people that are running a particular operation or wellness program. Very little prioritization. When I ask people about their goals, they oftentimes, and I ask them, are your goals prioritized? No, they say no, they're all of equal priority. But equal priority does not give much direction to us in terms of what the management and direction of our program should be. So no prioritization of those goals is a fairly typical pattern. They oftentimes are not emphasized very often, so they're rarely emphasized. So the goals are not restated, they're not mentioned again, they're not referred to, they're not, people aren't reminded about them. So they essentially sit somewhere dormant where they don't have much impact on the management and outworking of a particular wellness program. Another one of the patterns for the goals of wellness programs are that each group sees their particular goal as preeminent. So they may have a particular interest. Maybe it's in health improvement. Maybe it's in cost reduction. Maybe it's in retention or recruitment of new employees. So the issues there tend to be that those subgroups, those stakeholder groups, oftentimes see their own goals as preeminent and not necessarily aligned with other groups and stakeholders around wellness. Another pattern that I see in the existing work of program managers and wellness program staff is that frequently those goals are not linked to objectives or to metrics. So we don't necessarily gain the help that the structure that can be provided through goals if we haven't expressed the goal in one or more objectives, and then which are annual, whereas the goals are multi-year, and or metrics in terms of being able to look at whether a particular objective or goal has been affected or changed or achieved over a particular time period. And finally, another one of the current patterns that I see is that they're usually brought out in evaluation if evaluation is conducted. But oftentimes I find people not doing formal program evaluation on an annual basis. So they don't necessarily bring the goals out and ask the question, how are we doing on these particular goals? They oftentimes are known by the program staff, but not too many people beyond the program itself. So these are what I would consider to be some of the patterns that currently affect how wellness program staff are using their goals in their own program management activity. The criteria for a good goal, I believe, includes a clear statement of a desired endpoint, and often, by the way, that endpoint should be multi-year. So we aren't necessarily using a goal to achieve an annual activity. We oftentimes would call that an objective, and then having a metric which helps tell us whether we achieve that objective. They're also of strategic concern. Much of wellness in the U.S. is tactical in nature. It's simply putting on activities. So the ability to have a strategic concern reflected in a overall program goal is actually, I think, a good characteristic or criteria for what a good goal looks like. Another one of the criteria for a good goal would be inclusive of all important issues, so that the goals that you have, whether they're 5 or 8 or 10 goals, that they need to be inclusive of the important issues that management is doing wellness for, or the purpose that they have intended to achieve with a wellness program. They usually are stated in the positive form rather than avoiding something, like reducing a occurrence that's an adverse occurrence. You want it stated in the positive, being able to have a goal that there will be improvement, health improvement among participants, for instance. That would be stating it in the positive. Also containing only one major thought. So we should not have goals that have "and" in them. So we want to be able to focus a goal on one major thought only. Usually it needs to be measured in some activity. So we should be able to translate it, although the measurement metric is often not wanted or not limited to the goal itself. So we want to have a goal that has to do maybe with health improvement, but not have a goal which would have BMI levels as how we would be thinking about that goal. I might have a BMI in my objective, and then I might have a metric which has to do with the percentage of my population that are at particular BMI levels. So there I've created the goal, the objective, and the metric as it fits together. Another one of the character or criteria for a good goal is that there's an ability to convert it into a shorthand. We might say health improvement is one of our goals related to the improvement of the health status of the population. So our shorthand might be health improvement, or cost reduction, or medical trend reduction. So we need to have a shorthand way of talking about it that expedites our ability to discuss it and to have other people know about it and to have that be generally known by the population we're working with. Another criteria for a good goal would be linkable to an annual program objective. So we want objectives on an annual basis. They should be time limited so that they are achievable and measurable within that year period. And we want it linked to those as a goal. So our goals do need to be linked to some annual program objectives. That's one of the reasons why we don't want to have an enormous number of goals. If you can have 5 goals and prioritize them, or if you can have 8 goals and prioritize them, that's probably sufficient. You don't probably want to go too far beyond that in terms of objectives or codifying those objectives in very detailed ways and having too many of them. Appropriate to resources and support provided. So we don't want goals that we haven't and are not providing resources to accomplish or the support to achieve. So we want to make sure that our goals are going to be addressed by management in the area of resourcing and support and execution. So that's another criteria for what a good goal consists of. And finally, it would be really good if we could prioritize our goals. If we had 5 goals or 8 goals, if we had the ability to prioritize those, and we'll show you a method for prioritization toward the end of this module. But these, again, would be the criteria for a good goal. I'd probably say that one of the implicit ones as well, it's not explicitly stated here, is that the goal should be multi-year. We mentioned that at the beginning, but I want to emphasize that our objectives are usually annual and achievable and measurable within an annual time period. It's better when our goals may be a 3 to 5 year period. So we want those goals to be able to not just be have a short shelf life and not be able to be used for an extended period of time. That allows us continuity in terms of achieving more difficult kinds of issues that our goals are oftentimes focused on. Now, a deeper look at program goals. Let's look at some examples. And the process that I used with about 200 or so larger clients was to actually help them through the process of defining and putting their goals together and their objectives together. So I'm going to give you some of the feedback that I gave clients on how they might structure or organize a particular goal. For instance, the goal number 1, improve employee health, that may in fact be improve employee health in a measurable way. So I might modify that general goal of improve employee health. It's almost a shorthand form of the goal, but just to emphasize, if my management is concerned about measurement, I may want to introduce that measurable way issue in the way in which my goal is structured. On this second goal, reduce the growth of health costs, I may want to be more specific with my goal to be able to know and make sure that it's going to be measurable in terms of being able to be translated into an objective and or a metric. So that may be using the phrase, instead of reduce growth of health costs, is that current costs? Is that future costs? The clarification would be reduce the future growth rate of per capita health care costs. So that's where I'm looking at the numbers of employees as not and divided into the amount to give me a per capita cost. And that's oftentimes what we call medical trend. So that would be another way of stating this goal, reduce the future medical trend growth rate to below 6% or below 8%, whatever we think would be a reasonable goal for our program to try and work on over multiple years. The third suggested example here is reduce health risk. So if that's what we want to do, one way of saying that would be to reduce the prevalence of health risk among employees. Now, prevalence is simply frequency. It's incidence, how often it appears. So I'm going to want to reduce the numbers of those in my population. I may also want to reduce the severity. So I may want to say reduce the prevalence or severity of health risk among employees. Maybe I put that into a separate goal. So that would be another choice I would have at refining the program goals themselves. The fourth one here is save money for employer. So I may want to classify or categorize that and refine that as reduce health-related costs. And then I can decide what health-related costs are for my organization. Again, they're usually health plan costs, sick leave absenteeism, workers' comp, disability insurance costs, and presenteeism-related costs. Another one would be enhancing employee productivity. So I may want to enhance the level of employee productivity in a measurable way. So I may put that measurable aspect back into it because productivity is oftentimes questioned in terms of the methods we use to look at the component or the category of productivity that's addressed and whether it in fact is measurable in terms of being able to be seen over time as changing or modifying. Another one of the program goals starting points, for an example, would be number 6, satisfy employee needs. So that's a general kind of statement. So I could recraft that into a goal that would say achieve a high level of employee satisfaction with the program. That would be my goal statement. And then my objective might be carry out or conduct a program evaluation process that is responded to by a minimum of 30% of my population. And that's my measurable goal for the next year. And then that translates into a metric, which might be the average satisfaction score. So that may be how I want to measure that. Or my objective can be achieve an average satisfaction score of at least 8.0 out of 10, where 1 is poor and 10 is excellent. So that gives me an objective to work on. The 7th example here is improve recruitment and retention, and I may want to improve employee recruitment and retention levels. So I may clarify that we're looking at employee recruitment and retention levels rather than just assume that when people see improve recruitment and retention that they know what it means. HR staff will know what this means, but not necessarily others. So we want to talk about employee recruitment, job recruitment, filling new vacancies, how long it takes us to do those, perhaps. And then that might be the metric. And then the retention levels may be the percentage of people or the percent of people who change jobs or the percentage of jobs that turn over during a given year. And that's usually in the area of somewhere between maybe 8 and about 15%, depending on the type of industry. So that would be a metric that I might attach to an objective to follow up on this particular goal. The 8th example that we're using is change organizational culture. And again, it's kind of a shorthand version to something like shift our organizational culture to support wellness. So I can, in fact, conduct evaluation activities to ask people what their perception of the level of support that the employer provides for wellness. And then I can codify that into an index. So it allows me to, again, walk through the objective formation, attached to the goal, attached to a metric. So we'll look a little bit deeper at some of these in a later part of this module. Some rare but useful adjectives that management oftentimes wants to use with wellness programming and other things are things like we want a world-class wellness program, or we want to have a best-in-class type for our type of business, or we want to be best in our local area and recognized as a local employer that is doing wellness in a good way. We might want to be like Johnson & Johnson. They took on this particular adjective and said, we want to have the healthiest employees in the world. So that's a pretty significant commitment. It oftentimes then gets the outworking is the way in which you are going to do a lot of things that are health or population health oriented. Another one of these rare but useful objectives is if your management says, we want the most innovative program. We want to be in the cutting edge of change. We might also want to be award winning. So then I'm going to be doing a wellness in a way that addresses the award criteria of the organizations that we want to get the awards from. So that has some implications for how I structure the program, how I manage it, how it's organized and designed. Maybe we are engineering oriented or manufacturing oriented, and we want to have a Six Sigma level of program. So that's a innovative, effective, proven, established type. But other words like evidence-based program or the ability for us to have a very unusual wellness program or one that emphasizes a particular characteristic or attribute. So these are relatively rare, but management does in fact pick up these kinds of adjectives at times, and they should impact on what kind of design we construct for our wellness program and how we essentially execute that program. Now, some prioritization of goals can be done by looking at how those prioritized goals might look when you finish. So if we essentially go through a process I'm going to define for you in a moment, you can come up with a prioritized set of goals. So maybe going back to the previous list we started with, we might take that first goal of improving employee health and say that's our highest priority. Our second highest is to reduce the growth of future medical costs. The third is to reduce health risk. The fourth might be to save money for our employer. The fifth might be to enhance employee productivity. The sixth might be to satisfy employee needs. The seventh might be to improve recruitment and retention. And the eighth might be to change organizational culture. So this is simply an example of the general goal statements that we had, and you could take, for instance, the more refined example of these same goals that we went through a moment ago and actually have them be what you emphasize. This is more of our shorthand statement around a goal. So we don't need to be necessarily too tight on the issue of a goal statement if we want to be educating people about the general purposes of our program. It does help if your goal statement is well designed. It kind of meets some of the criteria we talked about to be able to use that with employees and management in a consistent way. But what we've done here is taken these general goal statements and then put them into a priority order. And again, we'll take a look in a moment at what a method for doing that might entail. Now let's look at a little bit of a clinic on creating goals and shaping and structuring goals. All right, if our original goals are help employees be healthier, you might revise that goal to improve employee health, and then we have measurable ways of being able to look at that. So we've made it more crisp, more focused. We've taken out the helping process to improving employee health. The second one here is launch a wellness program by 1/1/18. Maybe that's what we think our goal should be. but that is a time limited and 1 year kind of goal. So we might convert that to offer a wellness program each year. We might say that it should start or be offered on January 1, or it may be offered on September 1, whatever our choice is. But we can, in fact, create something that's used not just 1 year, but multi-year. Another one of the possible original goals might be to make wellness a priority for our company. So rather than say, what does that really mean? Is it a high priority? Is it low priority? Is there what's embedded in the sentence that's going to help us? I might choose to restructure that into and reformat it into make wellness a core value for our company. And maybe we define what core value is as one of the top 6 or top 8 values that are mentioned when we ask people to tell us about our company or our organization. So another example might be to reduce health benefit costs, but what does that really mean? Is that reducing the per capita cost right now? Is it reducing future trend in health benefits? So I may want to clarify that objective or goal rather as reduce the rate of growth of future health costs. So that reduction then can be translated into perhaps this coming year we're going to do a wellness program that we believe will reduce about 1/4 of the expected rate of growth or medical trend affecting our group of employees. So that would be a way to translate that into an objective. It could then be also placed into a metric. The next example is we want to create a world-class wellness program. And on the surface, that sounds good, but it would be better if we were providing that world-class wellness program each year to our population. So instead of just doing it once in 1 year, we're really thinking about how do I take the goal and make it an annual process that is repeated. So I'm not just creating a single year program, but producing a world-class wellness program and rolling it out each year. The next example of an original goal would be expand employee productivity. Now, but what does that really mean? So maybe I want to enhance employee productivity by reducing underlying health conditions. So that's maybe my larger goal. I can again do it for multiple years. It's clearer than just expanding productivity or using an adjective that doesn't necessarily tell me what is really going on. So I may get confused by the choice of adjectives that seem clear to me when I've articulated the goal, but when the goal gets transmitted to other people, they may wonder what it is, what it really means. Another one might be to have 50% of employees doing wellness. Now, we don't really know what doing wellness means. We also have the issue of, do we want to stick to just 50%? Do we want to have an objective that is phased in as we then move the wellness program participation up over time? So my goal for multiple years might be to engage a majority of employees in wellness each year. So that means it's got to be more than 50%. So that's what a majority would be. So that would be, again, an example of tightening up and improving the way in which the goal is drawn out. The next one example is introduce a dynamic wellness program. Well, I don't really know what a dynamic wellness program is, but maybe I want to use that term because it fits with my culture, but I want to provide a dynamic wellness program each year because that means the intention is to produce wellness and deliver wellness over the year. Rather than just introduce the program, I want to provide that dynamic program each year. Now, I also, we can look at what dynamic means. There may be better adjectives to use. Maybe it's effective or a results-driven wellness program. So it's being able to clarify the use of the terms that we put into these goals. The next example is to create a healthier company. Now, we can enhance the health status of our employees and their spouses. So that may allow us to reach out to spouses in our wellness program by not just defining the company as employees. or using that implicit assumption that it's just the employees we're focused on. The other issue here is healthier. What's healthier mean? It can mean lots of different things, but we may in fact want to improve the health status of our employees. So that then relates back to health status measures like BMI or cholesterol levels or blood pressure or exercise levels and or other risk factors, or the extent of preventive medical benefits or preventive medical care that's used. And that may in fact be the way that we want to further refine the objectives so that we can look at them in an annual evaluation way and then to have a metric that we are also tracking. And then the last of the original goals is to prevent future health cost increases. Now on the surface that sounds like, well, you should keep health cost increases to zero. So, and that's achievable with wellness of a particular kind and how you target and execute it, but that may not be what we're really intending. So the other example might be to minimize future health benefit cost increases each year. So if we have a expected future cost medical trend occurring, maybe we want to reduce that or minimize that by reducing it by at least a portion of maybe 25%. Now the scientific literature basically demonstrates that you can reduce medical trend by about a quarter with traditional wellness program designs. You can do much better than that if you in fact are using a results-driven model. So I may in fact have the model I'm choosing and strategy for wellness actually impact on what my goals are in terms of that cost stabilization. So again, this is a little bit of a clinic on creating goals and some suggestions about what kind of ways you might revise the original goals in a program to sharpen, clarify, make it more succinct, hopefully make it more attractive to both employees and management. Now, the prioritization process that I've used over the years is this. You start with well-written goals. So you have a set of goals that you're looking at. They're all not prioritized. They're just listed in some order, but the order doesn't have a priority meaning to it or importance connected with it. But you start with well-written goals. We've given you two sets of examples around how you might write those goals. Discuss what should create priorities amongst the goals with the group that you're doing this with. You can either do this with senior managers or you can do it with an advisory committee, a wellness advisory committee, and or a focus groups that you're holding. But you have the opportunity to start with a set of goals and you've crafted those into well-written statements, meeting the criteria that we've talked about, and then discuss what should create priorities. What are the things which we want to emphasize are the priorities? Is achievability over a 3-year period a high issue in setting priorities? Is it who has which goal? Is it the identity of the stakeholder that's going to determine what the priority should be? And then once you've discussed what some of those reasons for prioritizing goals differently, you then distribute to the group some sticky dots, the types of things that are used in marking files and things like that. They're just dots that can be put onto a piece of paper that allows the individual to vote for the specific issue. So if we have, somewhere in the area of maybe 1 to 4, that you've got maybe 10 goals. You've got 10 goals that you're prioritizing. So you might want to have maybe half of those 5 votes for each person, then or 3 votes for each person, or 4 votes for each person, so that they pick out of the 10, the 4 that they think are the most important, or the 5 that they think are the most important. That'd be a 1 to 2. So that then allows you, and then you have them vote on those goals that are stated on either a blackboard or they're on a flip chart, and you then count the votes and you order the priority by the number of votes. If there is a tie amongst one of the or two of the 10 potential goals, and you're trying to get really a sharper prioritization, you may give some more vote opportunities for people to make choices amongst those that have a tie. So that's how I would do some tie breaking. So, or I may go back to my reasons for creating the priorities or the underlying implication of what those issues are, and then have people re-vote amongst those specific elements. So I can then get a clear priority, a stack rank where you go from 1 to 10. Have each person vote, tally the number of votes, stack rank the goals, and discuss the implications of the order of the priorities. So that's a process that I've used multiple times to help people get clearer about their goals and have their goals actually be much more helpful to them because there's some consensus on the priority given to each. Now, a summary of key points. Wellness program goals are usually not well thought out or well written and not prioritized. Program goals should reflect the organizational consensus on wellness. So the more that I can translate those goals, translate it into the consensus that my organization has, the better off I am. Program goals are different than objectives. So goals are usually multiple years. We don't usually include metrics or specific issues in them. They are essentially giving us direction that is useful over multiple year periods. Whereas objectives are usually time limited, a slight stretch, measurable. They're usually attainable within a year period, and they usually involve a balance of issues that might include things like some outcomes along with some program operations objectives, along with some satisfaction objectives, those kinds of balances. Program goals need to be appropriate to the resources and support that are provided by the organization. So I don't want to have a set of goals that I really don't have the resources or the support to achieve. There are a number of criteria that define what a good program goal looks like, and we covered those criteria earlier on. Crafting good goals requires careful thought. It's important that you do spend time really thinking about what does this goal mean and how does it combine and how is it prioritized and so on. It is important to prioritize your program's goals. That helps enormously in setting the pattern and direction and management of your program. A program's goals should be a consistent touch point for consideration and should be reviewed often. So we really want to revisit goals. Goals that are not looked at are not really goals. They are simply, thoughts that people have or opinions. They aren't necessarily influencing the direction that a program is taking. There are processes that can be used to establish a prioritization of the wellness program's goals. The creation of well-formulated program goals is an important part of program management. Program goals can be refined as they are achieved. So I may begin to tweak my goals somewhat. If I'm achieving that, I may want to stretch it a little further or emphasize a subset of issues that are now maybe of concern to me. The last key point is that program goals are needed for program evaluation and for a strategic direction. So our goals can actually help us move out of that tactical preoccupation that many people in wellness have. Just go out there and do some activities. We don't want to be doing that. That just leads to activities that usually don't have much value. For a wellness program to really be valuable to an organization. It needs to have both tactical and strategic direction. So these are a summary of the key points for this particular module. Now, our key questions are as follows. First of all, why is it important to get a clear set of goals identified for the program? Well, we talked about some of the issues underneath the surface here, but it communicates the identity and the purpose of our program. So that's why we want to have that clear set of goals, and we want to use them repeatedly. We want to use the goals to true up our activity so that our activity actually conforms with our purpose. And then it also, a clear set of goals helps us aid the management of our program. So that actually helps me in making decisions about how I implement the program and execute it. And finally, it's important for the purposes of accountability. All of us need to be accountable to others. So our ability to make sure that our wellness program is accountable starts with a clear set of goals. Our second question is, we never mention our program's goals. What's wrong with that? And I think this is all too typical, unfortunately, is the goals don't get emphasized. So even the people who are working as volunteers in a wellness program sometimes don't know what the goals of the program are. So that leads to confusion, it undermines our performance, and it weakens our identity and the utility of our program. So that's why we don't want to just hold our goals close to our vest and not mention them and repeat them. Third question is, what are the most common problems with program goals? First of all, weak construction, weak expression, confused expression, not helpful to the program management, not prioritized, not revisited or used, and not helpful to its purpose and the statement of purpose. So those are some of the common problems that I've seen with program goals. Now that you've completed this particular module, go ahead and take the quiz.